The year was 1891. Deep in the heart of the Arizona Territory, there stood a small, forgotten town called Dry Creek. True to its name, the place was made of dust, wind, and a heavy, suffocating silence. Until, of course, violence broke it. People said the most dangerous thing in Dry Creek wasn't a gun, it was memory. A lone horse slowed near the town's weathered wooden sign, its rider a tall, quiet man, worn down by years he could never outrun. His coat carried the scars of old fights, and his eyes held the cold, tired calm of someone who had lost far too much. His name was Caleb Rourke. He read the words crudely nailed to the post: Dry Creek, no law after sundown. Caleb let out a faint breath. Caleb let out a faint breath. Some things never change. The moment he rode into town, he felt it 1,000 unseen eyes watching from shadowed windows, dark doorways, and dusty corners. In Dry Creek, strangers were either trouble or they were already dead. The saloon doors swung open as he stepped inside, the sudden motion silencing everything. The piano stopped mid-tune. Conversations died in an instant. All that remained was the sound of his boots on the wooden floor. Caleb walked to the bar and sat down. "Water," he said to the bartender. "Not whiskey." The bartender raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Most men drink first around here, then they ask questions." Caleb's reply was calm, steady. "I prefer staying alive." A harsh laugh broke the tension from the far corner of the room. A young man stood up, his face a mask of anger burning through cheap bravado. "Who are you?" he snapped, his hand hovering near his pistol. "Strangers don't last long in this town." Caleb met his stare. There was no fear, no pride. Just a profound exhaustion. "I'm only passing through," Caleb said, his voice low. "I'll be gone by morning." The young man sneered. "In Dry Creek, morning only comes if you survive the night." The room fell silent again, every person holding their breath, waiting for Caleb's hand to move toward the gun at his hip. But it didn't move. Instead, Caleb simply stood up and began to walk toward the door. As he reached the threshold, a voice called out from behind him, sharp and challenging. "You don't walk away like that." Caleb stopped. "Without turning around," he said, "I never draw first." And then he stepped out into the dying light. On the very edge of town stood a small, dilapidated shack, half-burned, barely standing, a ghost of a home. Outside, a woman sat on a broken crate, holding a young boy in her arms. The child stared quietly up at the darkening sky, already too familiar with fear to cry. Caleb dismounted his horse, the gentle sound of its hooves on the dry earth seeming loud in the stillness. "You one of them?" the woman asked, her voice raspy and suspicious. "One of who?" Caleb replied. "The ones who watch," she said, her tone laced with bitterness. "And do nothing." Caleb's gaze drifted to the boy. "What happened to this town?" Her voice shook as she answered. "The sheriff was killed 2 weeks ago. Now, the only law here is Evan Crow's law." The name hit Caleb like a distant gunshot, a memory he'd spent years trying to bury. "Crow?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "He's still alive?" She nodded slowly. "Alive. And worse than ever." Caleb exhaled a long, slow breath. This was why he had come. This was the ghost he had to face. "Why don't you leave?" he asked gently. She let out a short, humorless laugh. "You need something left to leave with. My husband, Crow's men killed him. All I have now is my son." Caleb lowered his eyes, the weight of her words settling on him. "My name's Mary," she said, her voice softening slightly. "This is Thomas." "Caleb," he replied. Night settled heavy and black over Dry Creek. Windows were shuttered. Doors were locked and barred. The air grew thick with anticipation, because Evan Crow's men were riding, and this time they knew a man had arrived who wouldn't draw first. Caleb built a small fire near the shack, its flickering light a small act of defiance against the oppressive darkness. Mary came and stood near the flames. "Why did you come back?" she asked quietly. Caleb stared into the fire, the dancing flames reflecting in his haunted eyes. "I used to be like Crow." He paused, letting the confession hang in the air between them. "I killed a lot of men," he continued, his voice heavy with regret. "Not because I enjoyed it, but because I thought that's how you survived in this world. And then," she prompted. "And then I learned," Caleb said, looking up from the fire, "that a man who wins every fight ends up completely alone." The fire cracked, spitting an ember into the night. In the distance, a new sound emerged, growing louder with each passing second. Hoofbeats. Hoofbeats, many of them, echoing through the empty streets. Caleb stood up, his tall frame silhouetted against the fire. "Stay inside," he told Mary. Her voice trembled with fear. "What are you going to do?" Caleb glanced down at the gun holstered at his side, and left it there. "I'll stand," he said, his voice ringing with a newfound resolve, "and see who draws first." The riders came closer, their forms materializing out of the darkness, and the dust of Dry Creek, settled for so long, finally began to stir. The night was just beginning. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more tales from the Old West. We'll see you in the next one. Dry Creek woke before the sun, shrouded in a familiar fear. This time, however, fear had a name: Evan Crow. He rode into the quiet town as if he owned the very dust kicked up by his horse's hooves. A smug smile stretched across his face, the kind worn by men who believe the world is their personal playground. He pulled his horse to a halt, his eyes landing on a lone figure standing outside a simple shack. It was Caleb. Crow's smile twisted into a sneer. "Caleb Rourke," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Still alive? Looks like hell spat you back out." Caleb remained silent, his posture unmoving, his gaze steady. Crow, enjoying the sound of his own voice, continued his taunt. "I hear you don't draw first anymore," he said, a mocking lilt in his tone. Caleb gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I wait." The answer seemed to amuse Crow immensely. He let out a harsh laugh that echoed through the empty street. "Then you're going to wait a long, long time." With a flick of his wrist, he signaled two of his men. They immediately spurred their horses, heading directly for Mary's shack. The air crackled with tension. Caleb's voice, when it finally came, was low and hard as granite. "Leave them alone." Crow paused, his amusement turning to curiosity. He leaned forward in his saddle. "Or what?" Caleb's eyes locked onto his, a fire long dormant beginning to smolder within them. "Or I remember who I used to be." The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. For a single, breathless moment, it felt as if even the wind held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The standoff was a silent battle of wills, a clash of past and present. That moment of stillness was shattered by Crow. Convinced of his own superiority, he made his move. His hand went for his gun, a blur of motion in the early morning light. But in that same, impossible instant, so did Caleb's. The quiet dawn was ripped apart by the deafening roar of gunshots. The sound was a violent punctuation to the long silence. Two of Crow's riders crumpled from their saddles, falling to the dusty ground before they even knew what hit them. Crow himself stumbled back, shock and disbelief etched on his face. He stared at Caleb, his bravado evaporating like morning mist. "You haven't changed?" he shouted, his voice laced with a new kind of fear. "You're still the same monster." Caleb took a deliberate step forward, the dust swirling around his worn boots. "The difference," he said, his voice calm and measured, "is that I used to fight out of anger. Now I fight out of responsibility." Crow, desperate and enraged, fired again. The bullet tore through the fabric of Caleb's coat, and a dark stain of blood followed. But Caleb didn't falter. Fired again. The bullet tore through the fabric of Caleb's coat, and a dark stain of blood followed. But Caleb didn't falter. He didn't even flinch. He just kept moving forward. One shot. That's all it took. Caleb's aim was true. He let out a piercing scream as his pistol clattered uselessly to the dirt. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his ruined hand, his reign of terror ending not with a bang, but with a whimper. Caleb stood over him, a towering figure against the rising sun. He bent down, picked up Crow's fallen gun, and simply placed it on the ground beside its owner. "Killing you would be easy," Caleb said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a final judgment. "Letting you live, that's the harder path." As the echoes of the confrontation faded, the people of Dry Creek began to emerge from their hiding places. Doors creaked open, and faces, pale but resolute, appeared in windows. Mary stepped out from her shack, her son Thomas holding tightly to her hand. The boy, seeing his protector, let go and reached for Caleb's hand, a small, trusting gesture that spoke volumes. Crow and his remaining men were tied up, their power broken. For the first time in a long time, the town stood together, a community forged in the fire of that morning's stand. Mary looked at Caleb, her eyes filled with gratitude and a question. "Will you stay?" she asked, her voice soft. Caleb looked around at the town, at the faces of the people who were now breathing freely. He saw hope where there had once been only despair. "No," he said, his gaze returning to the horizon. "But when darkness returns, remember this." He swung himself up onto his horse, the movement fluid and familiar. He looked down at the townspeople one last time. Some men don't draw first, but when they finally do, it's only for the right reason. With that, Caleb Rourke turned his horse and rode out of Dry Creek. a lone rider disappearing into the vast, open land. Soon after, the town sign was changed. The old, weathered wood that once read Dry Creek now bore a new message, painted in bold, proud letters. Law lives here. And they say, in the quiet corners of the West, that when injustice grows too bold and shadows grow too long, if you listen closely, you can still hear the faint sound of hoofbeats in the distance. Because some stories, the ones that truly matter, they never really end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales from the frontier.